The Grand Theft Auto 6 trailer just broke the record for the most views on a YouTube video in 24 hours. And why not? The anticipation has been building for over a decade. And as this Twitter user put it, we all just can't wait to shoot this woman off a car? The game has historically been, shall we say, a controversial one. The reason this tweet is so popular is because everyone knows that this is how people play the game. Obviously, the USP of GTA is its unprecedented freedom. You can do, it boasts, just about anything you like. And sure, this includes playing tennis, or yoga, racing bicycles, or getting a cab to the local pier. But, of course, you can also fatally stab the taxi driver with a machete, steal his cab, run over some prostitutes with it, and then kill yourself with a sticky bomb. All of this is available to the player, but, well, let's just say the tennis courts weren't in the trailer. If you give a generation of gamers the freedom to fire an RPG into a strip club without any real-world consequences, I think even those with an impossibly optimistic view of human nature can hardly be surprised at the resulting gameplay. So, today's question, is it unethical for Rockstar Games to enable such an indulgence? Should this orgy of violence and profanity be pulled from our shelves for the protection of our children, of our virtue? Here, viewer, is one analysis of that question. Let's start with the obvious. GTA is violent. Many video games are violent, but they don't all involve random violence directed arbitrarily at civilians and for its own sake. There are other examples of this, such as the infamous No Russian mission from Modern Warfare 2, where you play as an undercover operative posing as a terrorist, encouraged by the game's antagonist to indiscriminately mow down civilians in an airport. This was one of the most controversial gaming moments ever produced. But this mission did at least serve a plot point. The Call of Duty franchise often makes commentaries on the ethics of warfare, and you can interpret this mission as one which questions if the ends can always justify the means. You're not killing civilians for the thrill of it, but in order to gain the trust of an enemy in the service of homeland security, and it's supposed to be an uncomfortable experience. Outside of this context, such as in the Modern Warfare multiplayer, you're not given the opportunity to kill civilians for fun, like you are in GTA. I don't think that the ability to blow up an ambulance in Los Santos is making quite the same cultural commentary that No Russian is. However, one of No Russian's designers was asked by IGN if he was intentionally trying to do something controversial. He didn't respond by saying that he was trying to make an interesting story, but just that he was trying to create something memorable.
Did you mean to make something controversial? That actually wasn't my intention. What I meant to make was something memorable.
And sure, in the game's narrative, the character isn't killing civilians for fun, but as a player playing the video game, well, you're playing the game because it's fun, so maybe it kind of is just for the thrill of it. One genuinely similar game to GTA is, of course, Red Dead Redemption, but this is basically GTA set 100 years ago, and is also produced by Rockstar Games. In any case, should we really be playing any of these kinds of games? Can it be okay to glorify and trivialize the kind of violent behavior that they simulate? Well, here's the first thing that everybody likes to point out. There is no evidence that violence in video games transforms into violence in real life. Parents have historically been worried, understandably so, that shooting up animated strangers on a computer might brutalize their children. In the past, the government and some media outlets have tried to connect these games with mass shootings, for example.
This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace.
But wherever this has actually been studied, it's been shown incredibly difficult to find a link between video game violence and real-world violence. In fact, as MatPat from Game Theory has pointed out in a video on this topic, even the United States Supreme Court has stated in one of its rulings,
quote, psychological studies purporting to show a connection between exposure to violent video games and harmful effects on children do not prove that such exposure causes minors to behave aggressively.
Look, for all we know, video games may even decrease real-world violence by giving people a simulated outlet for their aggression, preventing that aggression from manifesting in reality. And it's worth noting that these games don't always strictly encourage violent behavior. As games journalist Paul Tassi points out in Forbes, in GTA, you're positively punished for it. If you commit a crime, you'll have the police coming after you. It's just about freedom. The game doesn't tell you to go around committing violence, at least outside of the campaign. It just gives you the option. In No Russian, you can complete the entire mission without firing a single shot, and are even given the option to skip the mission entirely. So we have quite good reason to at least reject the fear that violent video games cause actual violence. As video games writer David Jenkins put it for the Metro, the whole point is that a video game allows you to indulge in acts you would never do in real life. So given this, what could possibly be the problem with violent video games? They don't cause violence in real life. So video over, right? Sorry, that would be too easy. And you know it. One of the biggest problems about this ethical debate is that people act as if this is the only consideration. But what other than causing real-world violence could possibly be the issue? Well, maybe there's just a problem with glorifying violence, trivializing it. Even without any real-world consequences, isn't there just something a bit morally repugnant about turning this kind of material into entertainment? You're not convinced, are you? Well, here's one consideration. In 2016, Electronic Arts were promoting their new game, Battlefield 1, which is set in the First World War. They created a series of memes about the game to post online, including the following: "When your squad is looking on point," and "When you're too hot for the club." People didn't take too kindly to these posts. EA were accused of trivializing the very serious events of World War I, which, they kind of were. And the backlash eventually prompted them to delete the images and issue an official apology for disrespecting the World War I era. So EA had to apologize for taking the World War, a serious event, and trivializing it by transforming it into light-hearted entertainment. But isn't that kind of what the game itself does? Say what you like about Battlefield 1 educating people about history or whatever. People play the game because it's fun, for entertainment. And if trivializing World War I in promotional memes is so offensive, how can you justify turning it into a game in the first place? Notice how in the ethical discussion of this use of violence in entertainment, the potential real-world consequences weren't even thought of as a relevant factor. It'd be really weird to bring them up. This whole scandal was caused not by some fear of real-world consequences, but just because it was thought wrong to do in principle. Tasteless. Maybe you just think that the backlash to the memes was an overreaction. They're not actually immoral at all. Okay, I probably agree with you. I don't think that they were particularly offensive. But the principle stands that the real-world behavioral consequences of playing video games shouldn't be the only factor we consider in this debate. And I'll try to prove it. But first, speaking of social media and badly communicating ideas, I want to bring something to your attention. Information today is released faster than it can be verified, and algorithms tend to reinforce our own biases, further polarizing an already polarized world. Which is why I'm excited to welcome back Ground News as today's sponsor. If you're unfamiliar, this app and website aggregates news sources from around the world in one place, allowing you to compare coverage. For every article, they offer additional context like the potential bias of each source, a rating of how credible their reporting is, and even who owns the source. Take a look at this story on California's gun laws recently challenged in court. More than 100 articles have been published on it, and the coverage is pretty evenly distributed across the political spectrum. This isn't always the case, as you'll see if you follow Ground News' blind spot feed that shows which stories are being underreported by left or right-wing sources. Looking closer, I can see that the coverage differs even between sources that are labeled as leaning towards the same side. Look at these two headlines. Notice how one of them says the law banning guns in certain public places is temporarily halted, while the other says that the law bans carrying in most public places and that it was blocked. It's so helpful to read the news in this way, where a single word can change the public understanding of an event. Go to ground.news/AlexOC to try it for less than $1 a month, or sign up through my link for 40% off their Vantage plan, which is the one that I used. So, back to the video. I just claimed that we need to consider more than just real-world violent consequences in determining whether violent video games are immoral. If you're not convinced yet, I want to share with you a thought that I had, a thought which was the main inspiration for making this video. That, and riding on the coattails of the fastest growing YouTube video of all time, of course. And fair warning, it's a bit grim. If you don't want to hear about sexual violence, I recommend that you end the video here. I want you to imagine that GTA 6 comes out, and they've introduced a new ability for the playable characters. Now, as well as running, jumping, punching, and shooting, you can also, by pressing a button, commit sexual violence against NPCs. That is, you can walk up to them, press a button, and your character will assault them. I have a feeling that not only would there be a colossal backlash to this, but that this backlash would be quite understandable. This is an unimaginably gross and immoral game mechanic. I feel disgusted even talking about it. Can you imagine if they included such a freedom in the game? It would probably be immediately banned, and if it wasn't, the protests would be unprecedented. But what's changed? I mean, we still have all of those studies from earlier showing that in-game violence doesn't affect real-world violence. And we can still point out that the game doesn't encourage you to do this, it just gives you the freedom to. That is, we can put forward all of the same defenses that people propose for playing violent video games in general, and they would seem to apply here just as well. And yet, even if you could 100% prove that this wouldn't cause any real-world violence whatsoever, and even if you could prove that it wouldn't even change people's perceptions about real-world sexual offenses, I still think that there's something deeply wrong and disturbing about giving players the ability to make pretend in this particular way. And I imagine that most of you watching will agree with me on this. But if so, why isn't it also wrong and disturbing to allow players to run people over, or stab them with a broken bottle, or shoot them point blank in the head while they're surrendering as you rob their store? Think back to that Metro article I quoted earlier. The whole point is that a video game allows you to indulge in acts you would never do in real life. Indulge. What exactly is it that we're allowing people to indulge in? When I hear the word indulgence, I think of eating a whole box of chocolates, or binge-watching Netflix all day. You know, things that if I could get away with, I'd do. So what are we to make of indulgence in things like murder, theft, and battery? And if these are okay because they're not real and they don't affect the real world, then why not also allow players to indulge in this extra sexual criminality? I mean, hey, for all we know, this might even decrease real-world violence. I just think that this sexual assault button would be an immoral thing to allow players to, well, indulge in. And I have to say, it genuinely doesn't seem clear to me why whatever red line there may be should be drawn exactly there and not any earlier. So this is a bit of a conundrum, and I think proves that real-world consequences can't be the only relevant ethical consideration. Well, maybe this has just got something to do with the uniqueness of sexual violence. It does seem, after all, to occupy a different ethical category to other forms of violence. It's a much more brutal and personal form of violence. There isn't much I can say to either prove or disprove this idea. I can certainly say that it feels different, but here's the problem. It may be that other forms of violence are less bad than sexual violence, but remember, people like to claim that simulated murder in video games isn't bad at all. Not just that it's less bad than other forms of simulated violence. And this is because it's fake, and because it doesn't affect the real world. To make an argument for the uniqueness of sexual violence here, you'd need to show not just why it's worse than other kinds of violence, but why even when it's simulated, it's different in such a way as to make it immune to those justifications for simulating other kinds of violence that people like to use all the time. And I think that's quite a tall order. I mean, sure, maybe we should be more okay with murder in video games than we are with sexual criminality, but that doesn't show why we should be totally fine with one and totally not with the other. And just because I think it's worth mentioning and reminding you, even if you could show why we should draw this categorical distinction, this problem would still demonstrate what I was trying to prove earlier, that the real-world violent consequences of playing video games are not the only relevant ethical consideration here. Another reason might be that sexual violence, specifically against women, is a serious issue in the real world. And given that video games exist in the real world, this needs to be considered and counted. Now we're going back into the realm of real-world consequences, but I do want to dive into this thought more deeply. And, as it happens, this is something already relevant to GTA as the game currently exists. In 2014, Kmart and Target in Australia removed Grand Theft Auto 5 from their shelves. This came after a 45,000-strong online petition was successful in encouraging them to stop selling the game. But the petition didn't say, GTA is violent, or we shouldn't allow kids to kill people on a video game, or something like that. No, it specifically singled out sexual violence against women. Here's the petition. Target, withdraw Grand Theft Auto 5. This sickening game encourages players to commit sexual violence and kill women. GTA 5 doesn't have this sexual violence button that I was imagining, but it does already allow players to commit violence against women, including sex workers who are in the game. Thus, the petition. This game means that after various sex acts, players are given options to kill women by punching her unconscious, killing with a machete, bat, or guns to get their money returned. And this is true. There are prostitutes in Grand Theft Auto who the player can pay to perform sex acts. And if they like, they can then brutally murder her. Of course, there are no male prostitutes. And even get their money back from the corpse. Maybe this is a unique problem. Games journalist Colin Campbell writes for Polygon, I know a lot of people desperately want to believe that killing a prostitute in GTA 5 is the same as killing any other character, but it's really not. Unlike gangsters or cops, or business dudes or hot dog vendors, prostitutes, as a class, are despised, marginalized, and abused in real life all the time. This means that GTA 5 takes its pleasure in humiliating and abusing victims of humiliation and abuse. Sorry, everyone, but in my view, this just can't be right. As Paul Tassi points out in his Forbes article, which responds to Colin Campbell, yes, sex workers are a despised and mistreated class in the real world, but they're not the only marginalized people represented in Grand Theft Auto. It would be extremely easy, for example, for me to make my own petition saying, people of color are marginalized in the USA, in real life, and yet GTA includes non-white NPCs who you can abuse and murder. Indeed, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from going on a racist rampage in Los Santos, shooting only non-white NPCs and police officers. And because people of color face real resentment and discrimination in the real world, this shouldn't be allowed. Wouldn't this petition be just as valid as the one concerned about sex workers? I mean, sure, the game never encourages you to specifically kill non-white NPCs, but then it doesn't encourage you to kill sex workers either. It just includes them in the game. Or consider Red Dead Redemption 2. In this game, you can come across a feminist woman who's stood on the side of the street campaigning for women's suffrage. The game's set in 1899. Now, she's just there in the world. You can play the whole game without interacting with her at all. But players often do choose to interact with her, and Googling Red Dead Redemption 2 feminist, you'll find such charming video titles as Annoying Feminist Fed to Alligator, Beating Up Annoying Feminist, and Annoying Feminist Fed to Pigs. Astonishingly, these are all things that you can actually do to this woman in the game. So if the problem with the specifically sexual violence of killing sex workers in GTA is that they're a marginalized and abused class in real life, what about other victims of societal discrimination? Perhaps you shouldn't be allowed to kill sex workers, okay. But then maybe also not the elderly? Or non-white NPCs? Female NPCs? Honestly, I think a game which only allows you to kill white men might somehow be even more controversial than the game as it currently stands. Don't get me wrong, I do think it's quite disturbing to allow players to kill sex workers, but maybe this just means that there's something disturbing about this kind of game altogether. You're either playing a game where players can commit immoral and targeted acts of violence, or you're not. You can't pick and choose by just removing some kinds of people from the game and not others. Or can you? Playing GTA, you might not even realize that there is one group of people who are completely absent from the game altogether. This is a class of people who Rockstar probably wouldn't dream of including in the game, despite them being present in every population on the globe. Can you figure it out? Children. Children are completely absent from the GTA universe. Except for Michael's teenage kids in GTA 5, who you can't attack or shoot, and can only harm if you get a bit creative with explosives, there are no children in Los Santos for players to interact with, or to attack and kill. Why is this? Well, one reason might just be practical. When a video game is released in the USA, it will be appraised by the Entertainment Software Rating Board. This is where we get the US age guidelines from. E for everyone, M for mature, etc. Most violent games will receive a mature rating, recommending players be 17 or older. But there is one more, higher rating, adults only. This rating is given to exceptionally violent or sexual games, or games which gamble with real money. Game developers do not want an adults-only rating. The main reason for this is that, at least according to Wikipedia, Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony all prohibit AO-rated games from their platforms. Steam allows them, but hides them by default, and Twitch prohibits streaming gameplay from these games too. So your game just isn't going to sell if it gets an adults-only rating. An interesting side note, GTA San Andreas, which was originally released with a mature rating, was briefly re-rated to adults only. A mini-game in which characters have sex on screen was coded for the game, but not included in the final release because Rockstar wanted a mature rather than AO rating. However, the code was left in the game, and when it was discovered by the modding community who could activate the code with a mod and play the minigame, the ESRB re-rated the game, and the developers received a warning from the Federal Trade Commission and were the subject of a class action lawsuit alleging that they had misled consumers about the game's content. The game was also banned in Australia until the code was removed entirely. So, best not to include material that will get rated adults only. And surely, one easy way to almost certainly get stuck with this rating would be to allow players to murder children. So, that's probably why children are not in GTA. But why is it that killing children would almost certainly provoke an adults-only rating, but killing anybody else, including sex workers, in some of the most brutal and arbitrary ways imaginable, doesn't? I said earlier that games don't always strictly encourage violent behavior, they just give you the freedom to do what you want. But sometimes they not only encourage, but mandate violence, and quite brutal violence too. The GTA 5 campaign includes within it a non-skippable torture scene, where the player is made to waterboard, beat with a wrench, electrically shock, or use a plier to pull out the teeth of a man, even injecting him with adrenaline if the suffering is getting too much for him to continue. Is this not enough to get an adults-only rating? So we might have explained why, in practice, because of ESRB ratings, GTA doesn't have children in it, but we haven't moved an inch on the ethical question of whether they should be included, and why some things are okay to include without being branded adults only, and others aren't. It all just still seems relatively arbitrary to me. It is worth noting that it seems you could kill children in some older games, such as Fallout 1. I've never played it, but I did find a video online of someone vaporizing a child in the game, complete with a juvenile screech sound effect. From what I can see in the comments and on forums, this was controversial for many, and in later Fallout games, children were removed or made immune from attacks. However, not all the games are that old. In 2018, a game appeared on Steam, which was set for release a month later. The game was called Active Shooter, and was a school shooting simulator, allowing players to act either as the shooter or the police. The parents of the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting victims were, quite understandably and quite vocally, disgusted by this, and an online petition reached 100,000 signatures before Valve, who own Steam, removed the game's publisher from their platform. Not only this, but the game's publisher was dropped by their crowdfunding platform, as well as their web hosting platform, and even PayPal closed their account, citing their acceptable use policy. So, far from just being thought deserving of an adults-only rating, there are clearly some kinds of video game violence which, whether actually unacceptable or not, in your view, are certainly treated as such by society in a way that other kinds of video game violence simply aren't. And the question I'm posing is why? To be clear, I'm not advocating that children be included in GTA. I'm certainly not advocating that the game includes sexual violence either, but I am wondering if the inclusion of these things would be so obviously wrong, and doing so would get the game an adults-only rating, and probably cause protests up and down America and across the world, and not necessarily because we think it will have any real-world consequences, but just because it's wrong and disturbing in principle. Then why shouldn't this apply to simulated violence more broadly? For what it's worth, I will almost certainly be playing GTA 6. I'm not anti-GTA, any more than I'm pro-increase the violence. I'm just interested in what I see as an ethical grey area and a genuinely difficult moral challenge to violent video games. And this ethical question about where the limit should be for what we're allowed, morally speaking, to simulate in a video game can be summarized as follows. If trivializing or gamifying serious violence is unethical, then why are these games even on our shelves? And if trivializing or gamifying serious violence is not unethical, then why do we have any red lines on what we can include at all? Let me know what you think. If you want my view, I think people are just used to some things and not to others. We're just used to seeing certain kinds of violence in video games now, and so it's difficult to be morally shocked by it. And I think people are just basing what they consider to be permissible on how they emotionally feel about what's in front of them. I think about ethics in this way more broadly. I'm an ethical emotivist, after all. But of course, this is just a hypothesis about why people draw ethical lines where they do. It's not a justification for that behavior. If you think you have such a justification, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Thanks for watching.